Hello, I'm Amanda, and I'm back with another video blog for my Adolescent Lit class. This week we had to read manga or other graphic novels, and I chose to read The Diary of a Teenage Girl by Phoebe Gloeckner. I believe that's how you say her name. I'm going to give you a brief summary, but the majority of the video I'm going to be discussing the format of the book, and I'll explain what I mean in a little bit. This book is about a 15-year-old girl named Phoebe, and she's living in San Francisco in the 1970s, and it's basically like a big diary all about her life for approximately a year. It goes from spring to summer and then back to the school year again. And she is what people today would call promiscuous. She has a lot of sex and has no shame about it. She sleeps with her mother's boyfriend, with boys from school. She gets in a relationship with a girl at one point, and it's just all about her exploring her sexuality and becoming a young woman. Now, part of the novel talks about how she gets kicked out of a lot of schools. In this book, she gets kicked out of two, but she was already kicked out of another one. So she goes through 3 schools in the course of one book, so education really isn't a big thing for her. Her family life is kind of broken. Like I said, she's sleeping with her mother's boyfriend. Her mom's kind of an alcoholic and a pothead, and she has a younger sister, and they don't really interact that much. So a lot of it is that she's looking for attention, I think, and it just talks about like the different relationships that she goes through and how they impact her life. So that's the basic premise of the book. It's really good. I would highly recommend it. It's a little shocking, I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't expecting as much sex and vulgarity in the book as there was, but like I said, it made it a pretty interesting read, and I think it really reflects her adolescence. And now I'm going to talk about the format of the book. So the way that this book is written, it's written like a really big, long diary. And what I mean by that is it's broken up into diary entries. So for example, let me see. So for example, each entry is dated, and it's dated. So under spring, it's dated, and it has an entry, and it just basically goes in entry after entry after entry. So it's like a diary. And I really like the way that the author does this, because since it's a diary, it's very personal, and there's a lack of punctuation, so the thoughts are like rushing on the pages. Like there's not a lot, some entries don't have a lot of commas or periods. All the sentences blend together, and it really sounds like a teenager coming to grips with her thoughts and emotions. So I really like how that's done. And I like that it's a diary because not only is it in first person, we're getting everything from Minnie's point of view, but it makes it a lot more personal, and you can really connect with the narrator, Minnie. I like that it's a diary, and I thought that was really cool to see. And you know, diaries are private, and you can tell like it'll be catastrophic if anybody finds this diary. Another thing that the author of the book does is she also includes letters. So for example, Minnie writes letters to her friends from the school she got kicked out of, to her stepfather in New York, and to her mom's boyfriend Monroe. Like she writes letters within the diary entries, but she actually sends them out, so we kind of get to see Minnie's personal thoughts as she's sharing with all of these people. So for example, she writes to Monroe several times about how she doesn't like their relationship because she feels like she's really in love with him and she doesn't want to face rejection. She never really writes her stepfather back, Pascal, but he writes to her a lot, and he really hates that she doesn't write back to him. I like the letters because they're kind of a personal touch, and they show communication between Minnie and other characters without actual dialogue. So if she's not confident enough to say it to their face, she'll write them a letter. So for example, she really never talks to Monroe about how she feels about their relationship and how it's not really going anywhere, how she hates that it's so secretive and why can't he just love her. But she can write it all out in these letters. So she progresses in terms of her maturity. She acts like a little kid sometimes, and that was a little bit annoying at certain points in the story. She acted very childish and a lot younger than her 15 years. But when she writes these letters, it's almost as if she's maturing and she's learning how to put coherent thoughts down on paper. So the letters are a really great part of the story. They're not in there a lot, so when they are in there, you really get to see Minnie's growth, because you go from a diary entry where it's run-on sentences and thoughts and blurting and random typings to these really coherent, thought-out letters. So that was really neat. Another part of this book that's really cool is the fact that it includes illustrations. And when I say illustrations, I mean some of them are comics, like this, and some of them are just pictures in the page. And one thing really interesting that I found as I was finishing up the book, in the back it gives a list, like notes, kind of like credit, and the pictures in the book were, almost all of them were done by different illustrators. I thought that was really cool because they all had very similar representations of the characters, so it was neat to see how the author was able to create this image that several illustrators found commonalities. So I didn't even know that the pictures were by different people. I thought they were all by the same people, but it turns out that they're not. So I thought that really reflected how accurately the author presented Minnie. Another thing, besides just the straight illustrations, is, like I said, they have comics, and this is really neat because the comics aren't always between Minnie, and they're not always Minnie focused. So for example, there's one comic where her mother finds her diary, but Minnie's not even home and she doesn't know, so they present that in a comic book format. So we're kind of seeing other people's perspectives besides Minnie. So it's good for that in terms of showing other characters' point of views. And I also really like it because it gives you a break. Like I said, this book is pretty thick. It's not as bad as some of the Harry Potter books, but it's still pretty big, and I liked the comics because it gives you a break from all of the text that's in the book. And usually, if you don't have a picture every other page, you have a comic every couple of diary entries. They're not really long. They're really interesting to read. I've never been one to really read comic books, so it was kind of cool to learn which thought bubbles you read first, the way that works. So it was really neat, and I like the illustrations a lot because they kind of give me a visual, like what I can imagine Minnie going through. For example, there's one part in the book, she gets addicted to drugs, and in her diary entry she mentions that she's got these boils all over her body, and it turns out it was from a bad injection. And you can read that, and you can kind of picture in your head, oh, she must be in a lot of pain, but then there's an illustration to accompany that particular instance, and you can really see it on her face. You can really see that she's uncomfortable. You can see the boils all over her, and it just makes the story a lot more powerful. Drugs are definitely a sensitive topic, and I think adding certain illustrations makes it really powerful and impactful and kind of gives you an idea of, hey, this is really bad for you. And Minnie doesn't want to do drugs the rest of her life. She wants to stop, but it's finding that ability to stop. And those pictures kind of give you like a wake-up call. It's almost as if they're those PSAs, like public service announcements for drug use. Other illustrations are just kind of scattered throughout the book, which is really neat because they're nice little pictures, nice little breaks from the storyline. So here's an example. There's lots of different illustrations, and I like them because they are cartoonish, and that's a little bit childish, but at the same time, Minnie's character is also very childish. So it's kind of neat to see how the different illustrators add those pictures in to give the story a little bit more character. And finally, the last type of illustrations that are in the book are Minnie's comics. Minnie is a really good artist, and that's something that she kind of figures out throughout the whole book. She doesn't have a direction, like she doesn't like school, she doesn't like doing work, but she loves to draw, and she has these really cool comics. There's only a couple, and they're very vulgar, a lot of nudity, a lot of sex and drugs, but they're Minnie's and they're hers, and we kind of get to see that emotion from Minnie, because a lot of them have to deal with her dreams and kind of going off of her and Monroe's relationship. So it's neat to see Minnie's own comics in the book and how we kind of get inside of her head a little bit, because even though she talks about what she's thinking in her diary, it's a whole different experience to see it out on a picture. So overall, between the diary entries, the letters, the comics, and the other illustrations, this is a really interesting read, and I think we take for granted the idea of a diary telling a story. Sometimes people write in diaries all the time, but you never imagine anybody reading it, and here we are reading this girl's most intimate and personal thoughts, and all of these elements in the book really make it more powerful, and I think really help us experience Minnie's experience in her life. So, thank you for listening to my blog, and have an awesome day.